Let's talk about the what it would take. I mean, presuming that we're all starting from the same place of that we want to encourage more people to go to experience higher education, to become educated, and also to have more freedom within the context of that to pursue studies that don't necessarily have a return a an explicit return on investment as it's measured generally now across society. How do we? Why is that important? How do we get there?
Well, so I mean, I think this sort of will take us back a bit to your previous point about libertarian, sort of the libertarian line on, and sort of the fault lines on this question about whether everyone ought to be able to go to college. Period. And I think there we see it sort of as a class question, really. Part of it is about values, right? I mean, I believe that everyone ought to go to college, but part of it is about who can go and who can't. And so typically the people you hear making that argument that, maybe not everyone should be going to college, or if you can't afford it, you can't go. Those are people who either have been to college or whose kids are going to college. They're not the ones who are worrying about it. And so it's condescending, and it's sort of betraying their class privilege to begin with. So I think that's sort of where we need to start about understanding this issue. In order to make it all work, we could make college free for everyone for about 4% of the federal budget, which is about a quarter of what we already spend on defense. Right now, the average state spends about 6.6% of its budget on higher ed expenses. The federal government could relieve all of that and relieve all tuition and fees for all students at about 4% of their budget. So as a percentage of the budget, the federal government can make college free for less than what your average state is already doing. So it's really, it's sort of a rounding error on the federal budget. It's laughably inexpensive. As far as, if we want to use sort of their language of return on investment, we have an example to draw on, which is the GI Bill, which after World War II sent 8 million veterans back to college for free, gave them a living stipend, and 40% of people who used it said they wouldn't have gotten to college otherwise. And in 1987, about 40 years after it was passed, the Congressional Budget Office released a study that said for every $1 the federal government spent on the GI Bill, they got a return of $7 in tax revenue from the productivity and income gains it generated. So, that's a pretty good return on investment by, I think, any business person's standards. Not that that's how I want to measure the value of college, but I think, free higher ed would not only be great because it would let everyone go to college, but it would also stimulate the economy tremendously. Construction would go up on campus, commercial development around campuses, hiring of faculty and staff. It would be a real boost to the economy. And sort of on that note, I just saw yesterday, actually, I think the Brookings Institution put out a study that said austerity since the crisis started in 2007, 2008 has cost the U.S. economy about 2.2 million jobs. Part of that is so about 500,000 jobs have been completely cut by local, state, and federal governments. But the other side of that coin is that every recession since 1970 until this one, the government increased their public sector employment by about an average of 1.7 million per recession. So the net difference here, since we've been cutting rather than adding, is about 2.2 million. So if a program like free public higher ed would actually be a real stimulus for the economy beyond its humanistic and sort of emancipatory, liberatory effects.
Yes, and those past recessions include under Reagan, under George W. Bush, every single president who has been has had an administration during sort of the wake of a recession has increased the number of government workers without exception. And we should also add that when you talk about those 40% who wouldn't have otherwise been able to go to college, the lack of debt probably also freed up the other 60% to pursue where their interests lied. And we should I would also add that while I don't think there's necessarily a structural problem in terms of this unemployment, it's more cyclical. To the extent that there's any evidence that it's structural, having a college, having an education, whether you've been studying poetry or whether you've been studying engineering, it teaches you to learn. And when you talk about retraining workers or trying to create some type of flexibility within a workforce and its ability to deal with changing economies, that gives you, I don't know how one would measure that, but certainly the capacity to learn at that level has got to help you in the future.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's impossible to measure but the impact that the critical thinking development that occurs, and just the socialization, meeting people you'd never otherwise have met, getting exposed to different kinds of people, different kinds of ideas. Those pay benefits that we can never measure, but they're important ones for sure.
Now, when you talk about how to get to this place, I mean, that's why you very quickly dismiss the idea of a legislative, or at least starting from a legislative process, which is, in part why I mentioned Senator Warren's proposal here, and it continues to follow this model of let's allow students get into debt. It'll just be a little bit less debt going forward. But you talk about the need for a movement, and this brings you back to trade unions. Why focus on trade unions when the perception is they're at their, and it's not just a perception, I mean, just in terms of sheer numbers, they're at their lowest ebb in terms of political power over the past 70 some odd years?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess this sort of goes back, sort of the dismissal of legislation goes back to, I think, what you were talking about right before I came on, about Obama's proposal to cut Social Security. So, I mean, we're in a moment now, a historical moment, where a Democratic president is proposing cuts to Social Security. That would have been unthinkable even 5 years ago. So clearly, right now, today, legislation that's going to seriously expand the public sector is out of the question. There's no way that's going to happen today. It's naive at best to think otherwise. But that doesn't mean that over time that political center of gravity can't be shifted. And I think that's how we need to think about this thing, as a longer term project. And so sort of in that spirit is where I raised the trade union point. For one, historically, unions have been at the center of basically every progressive achievement that's worth mentioning over the past 150 or so years. I mean, they were back in the middle 19th century. They were behind, in many ways, the universalization of public primary education. Obviously, the 8-hour day, which May 1st just happened, sort of commemorating the long struggle for the 8-hour day. Child labor laws, minimum wage, all the way even through civil rights. Sort of a part of that story that's often omitted is the role that trade unions played in sort of advancing the civil rights struggle. Sort of an interesting story there is that Martin Luther King was actually recruited by trade unionists in Montgomery to speak on behalf of the bus boycott there in 1955. He wasn't even the first minister they actually called on. I think he was the third. But the point being that that unions have been central to basically all progressive struggles since industrial capitalism emerged in this country, and there's really no reason to believe we can do much serious activism without them. So now onto the point of, sort of the decline of the labor movement. When we think about inequality, that's the way inequality has risen in the last 40 years. I think, there's a direct correlation, an inverse correlation with the rise of inequality and the fall of the labor movement. A study came out a couple of years ago that said since 1973, union memberships plummeted by 75% and inequality has risen by 40% over that same period. So, and I do very much think that this crisis in higher ed, as I noted with the stagnating household wages, is about inequality as much as anything else. So we are going to need to strengthen and revitalize the trade union movement to do anything, really. That's sort of one point. But putting that aside, even at its low point right now, unions represent 12% of the workforce. It's the lowest in a century. That's still 14 million workers. That's nothing to sneeze at. And if we could get 5% of that activated in a cause like this, that's close to 1 million organized workers with all the resources that come with organization. And that could be a start. That's not nothing.